everybody. Welcome to this fifth installment already. Fifth installment, can you believe that? Of the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone camp from Signum University. Let me make sure my technical stuff is all going well here. All right, wonderful. Today we're going to talk about Harry's first days at Hogwarts. Harry's starting school. And we all know how exciting that can be. We've all had our first days of school. We've all had our first days perhaps at new schools or at places we aren't familiar with. We know what that feels like. Only Harry, he's got a few other challenges at the same time because Harry's school is magical. And that makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? It's going to be a really different experience for him than it even is for us, although there's similar things too. Every kid starting at a new school faces some of the same issues. New students, new friends, new teachers, new classes, everything's different. It's just Harry has to deal with some ghosts and a poltergeist too, as we'll see. Before we get started on our lecture for today, I wanted to share with you guys a picture. So let me change my screen app here. Hang on a moment. There it is. Can you see that? There was a question that came up yesterday about what the floor of the Great Hall looks like. And it doesn't really mention it in the books, but there's a picture here that comes from Pottermore.com. And this image shows the floor of the Great Hall. I'm going to try to, zoom in on it a little bit there. And you can see that the floor here looks like those flagstones I was talking to you about, those big rectangular stones that are all laid together in a pattern. So for people who are doing their dioramas, that's something you may want to consider, using that flagstone look. You can cut out construction paper that looks like it, or some kind of a flat plastic. You guys can figure it out. But there's the floor of the Great Hall, just so that people know what that might be like. Okay, I'm going to jump back to our slides here. There we go. And we're going to get started talking about Harry's first days at Hogwarts. Getting started. We meet Harry in this chapter through the eyes of other students first. Harry hears a lot of whispering around him, doesn't he, when he starts school, those first few days. Is that him? The kid over there, next to the red-haired kid. Do you see his glasses? Do you see his scar? Harry's famous, remember? Even if he doesn't really remember what he's famous for, he's famous. And that can make it pretty hard on a kid starting at a new school. Just think of what you would feel like if everybody already knew who you were, but you didn't know anybody, and everybody's pointing at you and whispering about you. Boy, how would you feel? I don't know about you guys. I would feel pretty insecure. I would feel pretty lost. I'd feel pretty helpless. But you know, Harry, he just kind of keeps going through it all, doesn't he? Well, not to mention the maze that is Hogwarts. The first challenge is just finding your way around Hogwarts. Listen to this. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts. Wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls, just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where everything was because it all seemed to move around a lot. How would you like to go to a school like that? It's hard enough to find your way around a new school, right? I remember when I started high school, oh my goodness, trying to get from class to class in just 4 or 5 minutes, that was almost panic time. What if you had to do it if the staircases moved and the doors wouldn't open? Or if you met the ghosts? Now, nearly headless Nick, he was pretty good for a few tips to help Gryffindors along. But what about Peeves, the poltergeist, the noisy ghost? Remember what he was good for when you were late for class? A waste paper basket on the head? Getting pelted with chalk? Him grabbing your nose out of nowhere because he was invisible? How would you like to have a poltergeist come up and grab your nose when you're trying to find your classroom? Right? That's pretty freaky. And then there's Mr. Filch and Mrs. Norris, the Hogwarts caretaker and his cat. Not the nicest creatures in the world, are they? Put one toe out of line, and Mrs. Norris went off to Filch quick as could be. Okay, and of course Ron and Harry, they got on the wrong side of Filch the very first day because they were trying to get into that corridor that was off limits. We didn't talk about that last time, but Dumbledore had made his announcements at the start of term feast. And he said the corridor on the 3rd floor, off limits, unless of course you want to die a very painful death. And since nobody does, you pretty much want to avoid it. But Harry and Ron, that first day, lost as could be, tried to get through the door on that 3rd floor corridor. And Filch, he didn't believe them when they said they were lost. But they were saved by Professor Quirrell, who just happened to be passing by and came to their rescue. Now, when you could finally get to them, the classes themselves proved to be extremely different and challenging for Harry. Now, he had gone to an elementary school, okay, like all of us do, learn the basics, right? Classes are very, very different now, and he learns that in a hurry, doesn't he? And then, once you had managed to find them, there were the lessons themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wand and saying a few funny words. Remember how he had to go up onto the astronomy tower Wednesday nights at midnight, look at the stars, learn all the placements of the stars? He had to have herbology, go out to the greenhouses and learn how to care for magical plants. He's got Professor Sprout for that one. He has history of magic with Professor Binns, the only ghost teacher. Remember, he fell asleep in front of the staff room fire one night, woke up to go teach the next morning, just left his body behind. Not sure he really noticed, but he just kind of kept on the same pattern as he always did. Just now he's a ghost. He's got charms with Professor Flitwick. Remember that tiny little wizard who has to stand on a pile of books so he can reach the podium? He called Harry's name on the first day and then was so surprised he toppled backwards off the books and landed on the floor. Harry sometimes does that to people. And there's Professor McGonagall, who teaches transfiguration. And Harry knows that she is not somebody to mess with. And indeed, she gave her class a good little talking to on their first day. You ever had a teacher do this? Give you a talking to on the first day? Well, here's what she said. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. Bet your teachers never did that. Okay, he's got defense against dark arts with Professor Quirrell, who doesn't really want to talk about it all that much. Remember when Seamus asked him to tell him about something, it was the vampire or something? Professor Quirrell quickly started talking about the weather. He's a little scared of his own subject. Remember we talked about that beforehand? And Harry's kind of relieved. He's realized he's not really all that far behind. The other students know just as little as he does, really. Many of them come from Muggle homes. Even students like Ron, who have grown up in wizard families, there's so much to learn. Even they don't have much of a head start. So that makes Harry feel a little bit better. But then the tough class comes. Double potions with the Slytherins in Professor Snape's classroom. Quite an introduction Professor Snape gives to his class. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potions making, he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. As there is little foolish wand waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death. Look at this little speech from Snape. You don't expect Snape to be poetic, do you? What have we learned about him so far? He's got greasy hair, a hook nose, sallow skin. He looks at Harry. Harry's scar hurts. We don't know much about him, but it doesn't suggest poetry. And yet, here's poetry. This is beautiful. Notice the images that he makes, how he plays with our senses, how JK Rowling, through this little speech of Snape's, plays with our senses. Can we see that softly simmering cauldron? Think about what that might look like. Cauldron with just a few little bubbles across the surface. The shimmering fumes. Picture the steam rising off that cauldron, simmering, shining in the air as the light catches it. Okay, we can see this in our minds. She's not just telling us, she's showing us. We can really picture what she's describing. That's called imagery. When a writer does that, using these sensory words, these sensory details, the things that appeal to our five senses, to help us picture a scene or an image, that's called imagery. And as you can see, JK Rowling does an excellent job of that. Notice her word choice here too. She uses very vivid words. Again, she doesn't just tell us, she shows us. Simmering. That's a vivid word. We can picture what something looks like when it's simmering. The word creep, the power, delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins. That suggests a slow motion, almost like a snake, doesn't it? Bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. Okay, so she uses great imagery. She chooses words that are very, very descriptive, very vivid. And she also uses what we call alliteration. Anybody ever heard that term before? Poets or people who are writing poetic prose. So words like this that we're reading in this kind of a novel, not poetry, but prose. Some prose can be very poetic. Authors use what's called alliteration sometimes to make their texts even more interesting to readers. Alliteration is when several words have the same sound at the beginning. Softly simmering cauldron. Hear that S word in there? You can almost hear the simmering, can't you? Think about what it sounds like when something is simmering. It's kind of this little hissing action going on. Softly simmering cauldron. Shimmering fumes. Ensnaring the senses. Hear all those S's? Bottle fame. Brew glory. That's pretty nice writing right there. And we should take a few minutes to stop and appreciate it like we're doing. Okay? We don't expect this out of Snape, this kind of idea, this kind of poetry, and yet here it is. It almost makes you want to take potions, doesn't it? It kind of does me. I don't think I'd be very good at it. I didn't like chemistry very much in high school, and that's closest of what potions is to chemistry perhaps. But he almost makes me want to try. And remember Hermione sitting at the very edge of her seat? She wants to get in on this. She loves this. This is appealing to her. Of course, do you also remember how Snape ends this little speech? He's going on so beautifully about his subject, painting images, using vivid words, even using things like alliteration to help us see and hear what he's describing. And then he says at the end, if you aren't the bunch of dunderheads I usually have to teach. Oh, come on, Snape, really? Did you have to end like that? But he does because that's Snape, right? We all get used to him over time. That's what Snape does. There's a couple of sides to his character, and we see them both right here. This beautiful poetic imagery next to, if you aren't the bunch of dunderheads I usually have to teach. And of course, we know that Snape isn't really very fair to Harry. He doesn't like Harry at all. And Harry can't understand why. Because, of course, Harry, he's done absolutely nothing to Professor Snape. He doesn't even know him. But Harry has a really hard time in Snape's class that first day. You remember what happens? Several different things. When Snape is calling roll at the beginning of class for the first time, he says, "Ah, yes, Harry Potter, our new celebrity." Can you hear him saying that? I don't know about you guys, but this is one place where the movies really infect my brain. You know, I'd like to read the book and develop all my own images and my own way of hearing and seeing these characters, but I can't help it. After I saw Alan Rickman play Snape in the movies, you guys know what I'm talking about. He just is Snape. He does such a remarkable job with the character that I can't even think of Snape any other way. I bet you guys agree with me. At least some of you do, if you've seen the movies. Okay, but our new celebrity, he says to Harry. And then he singles Harry out again and again. And he asks him all these crazy questions that a first-year student wouldn't know. Where would I find a Bazor? Poor Harry. What's that? I don't know, sir. He answers very politely. Harry's polite all the way through. Now, what's the difference between Monk's Hood and Wolfsbane? I don't know, sir. This happens 3 times. And of course, you remember Hermione? She's sitting there with her hand in the air, just about jumping out of her seat because she does know. It's typical Hermione, right? So Harry doesn't know. And unfortunately, Snape sneers at him, criticizes him, really puts him on the spot. And this isn't fair. And we all feel this. We all feel for Harry here, don't we? That this is really unfair. We'll go on and see. It's even a little bit more unfair, a lot more unfair, we might argue. After poor Neville, who is not starting out his potions career well at all, melts Seamus's cauldron for the first time. And Snape blames Harry, who wasn't even anywhere close. You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? Thought he'd make you look good if he got it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor. Harry's just bewildered. He has no idea why Snape is targeting him like this, pointing him out, being that unfair. Why do you guys think he's doing this? What do you think? Type in. Remember, you can type in the questions box. Why do you think Snape is picking on Harry so much? It's hard to know, isn't it? Any ideas? Why is he being so unfair to Harry? Maybe that's a question we should save toward the end of the book, because we kind of find out there then, at the end of the book, don't we? Somebody's typing in here. Let me see. Yeah, just so he doesn't feel special. Yeah, maybe Snape is thinking like, well, this is all going to his head. You know, being famous. Everybody's looking at Harry. Everybody likes Harry. We got to keep him from getting a big head here. Maybe he doesn't want everyone to think he likes Harry. Yeah, it's possible. Okay, trying to keep him from getting a big head, letting that celebrity thing. Okay, well, let's keep that in question in mind, and let's see if we can come up with other answers to it as we go through the book. But at any rate, right now, Harry's feeling pretty crummy about this whole potions thing and about Snape. And can you blame him? I don't. I'd feel pretty crummy too. But at least he has something else to look forward to. He is going to go to Hagrid's house for tea after class, and so is Ron. They're both going to go out to Hagrid's. This is the first time they're going to tea at Hagrid's cabin. Now remember, we've talked a lot about appearance versus reality with Hagrid. How he looks so wild, he's so big, he's got this bushy hair, bushy beard, and yet he's one of the kindest people that you'd ever meet. Gives Harry his first ever real birthday present, treats him like a wonderful friend. Okay? What kind of a house would you expect Hagrid to live in? Well, Harry's going to find out. There was only one room inside. Hams and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fire, and in a corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. Pretty homey, isn't it? Remember how we said when Hagrid came to the hut on the rock to get Harry, that he brought home into horrible? He made that hut actually pretty homey and pretty nice with his tea and his sausages and his birthday cake and his nice warm fire. Well, his own house is like that too. Food, nice warm bed, nice fireside to sit at when it's cold. It's just a nice, homey place to be. Who else lives in Hagrid's house? Do you remember? Who else lives with Hagrid right now? Anyway. Somebody's written it. Fang. Yes, exactly. Fang the dog. Fang the boarhound. What a boarhound is? It's this massive dog with big jowls. And remember, he barks and he barks and he barks when Harry and Ron come up. Would you be scared? I think I would if this big, massive dog with this big, massive bark is carrying on as I'm coming up to a house. I think I'd probably turn around and go the other direction. And Harry and Ron stick it out, and Hagrid's yelling, "Back, Fang, back!" I think I'd really run then, because I would interpret that as being, this dog is scary. This dog's dangerous. But remember, we said that sometimes characters misinterpret things. Reality and appearance aren't always the same thing in the Harry Potter books. In fact, very often they aren't. What is Fang really like behind that big bark? What do you think? What's Fang really like? Somebody write in. Tell me about Fang. Does appearance match reality? Does his bark match his bite? He's cuddly. Yes, he is cuddly. His bark does not match his bite. He's kind. He's curious. Boy, I'd say he's curious. Remember, he licks Ron's ears? And he drools all over Harry's robes? Yeah, so again, just like Hagrid, it's another example of appearance and reality being very different. Fang has a big bark. He's a big dog. He looks scary, but he loves everybody. And he drools on everybody. Have you ever met a dog like that? Dog that you're kind of scared of, and he turns out to be one of the nicest little things, or big things maybe, that you've ever met? Okay, so we can't always judge based on appearances. We have to really know what's going on to make the right interpretation. Okay, so Harry and Ron have a nice tea at Hagrid's. But Harry sees something when he's there. He sees a newspaper clipping on the table. And this newspaper clipping talks about the Gringotts bank robbery, which occurred on July 31st, on Harry's birthday, right when he and Hagrid, right around the time he and Hagrid were at Gringotts. Let's take a look at that newspaper clipping, see what it says. Investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on the 31st of July, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your noses out of it if you know what's good for you, said a Gringotts spokesgoblin this afternoon. How would you like to speak to the Gringotts spokesgoblin? Not very diplomatic, is he? Keep your noses out of it if you know what's good for you. Well, this raises Harry's eyebrows and curiosity, doesn't it? We find out the date, July 31st. We find out that the vault had been emptied that date. Harry puts two and two together very quickly. That vault that had just been emptied, Hagrid, perhaps, had been the one that emptied it. Okay, so now Harry's got all these sorts of questions. He gets a little information, but now it just raises more and more and more questions in his mind. What was in that grubby little paper-wrapped package? Is Hagrid hiding something? Is he hiding more than one thing? He's not telling any more about any of this. He won't say a thing. But now, Harry's curious. And we all know what happens when Harry gets curious, don't we? He's kind of like Fang is with a bone. He doesn't want to let go. So we've set the stage. Our author has set the stage for a mystery. Something was taken out of that vault. Somebody else wants whatever that thing is. And now, Harry's curious. Okay, so we've got more elements of this story coming to play all the time. So we're at the end of chapter 8. Let's look at your journal question. Which Hogwarts class would be your favorite and why? If you could take any class at Hogwarts, which one would you choose? Somebody write in and tell me. There are a couple of you. You can write about this in your journal and do the whole why thing, why you'd like this class so much. But what class would you like to take? Charms. Yeah, that would be a fun one, right? Making things fly. Okay, anybody else? Anybody want to take potions? Oh, yeah, somebody wants to take potions. Very good. Okay. I think I'd like transfiguration. I think I'd like to learn from Professor McGonagall. Yes, she's strict, but doesn't she know her stuff? I think I'd like to learn how to change one thing into another. That would be fascinating, like Hermione says. Oh, somebody else wants defense against the dark arts. Somebody else transfiguration. Very good. There's a lot of possibilities at Hogwarts to have some interesting classes. Okay, now take some time later on to write about this in your journal. Remember, we talked about how our journals help us interact with these stories and really make them our own. Our journals, our writing, our thinking, our drawing, all of those things help us insert ourselves into the story. And that makes reading all the more fun. So let's go on. We're going to talk about chapter 9 now, the Midnight Duel. Before I move on, though, has anybody got any questions for me about chapter 8 or anything else? We'll just pause real briefly. Questions about chapter 8? Anything else in Harry Potter? Okay, if you think of anything, we'll have a little time at the end of class like we usually do to talk about questions and comments. Okay, so let's begin talking about chapter 9, the Midnight Duel. Beginning of this chapter, mail delivery happens. And mail delivery at Hogwarts is something special in its own right. Mail delivery there isn't the postman putting letters in your mailbox. It's hundreds of owls swooping into the Great Hall. How would you like that for mail delivery? Oh, somebody did ask a question. How do they make those candles float? Magic, right? Remember what the professors can do? We'll see more of that later, but they enchant those candles so they fly by themselves. It's pretty cool. All right, let's take a look at the present that Neville gets in the mail from his grandmother. It's a Remembral, he explained. Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this. If it turns red, oh! His face fell, because the Remembral had suddenly glowed scarlet. You've forgotten something. Now, how helpful do you think the Remembral would really be to anybody? Would you like to have a Remembral? I think a Remembral would drive me crazy. If it was always turning red and I knew I'd forgotten something, but I couldn't remember what I'd forgotten, yeah, not very helpful, I agree. It doesn't tell you what you've forgotten. But it does help our story move along, this Remembral that Neville gets. Sometimes authors do this. They introduce a little gadget or a little device or a little thing that doesn't seem very important, and they use it to help move our plot, our storyline along. And that's what this Remembral does. Okay, so Neville's got his Remembral. And everybody of the first years at the Gryffindor table that morning is nervously looking forward to something. Something new is starting at Hogwarts that day. Flying lessons. Okay, something else is going to happen. Harry, he's afraid of looking foolish. Hermione, she's afraid of having to learn something not found in a book. Although she tries her best to read about it in a book. Remember, she was telling everybody about Quidditch through the ages and telling people flying tips from that book, driving everybody nuts. Neville, he's just afraid, period. His grandmother never let him near a broomstick, which was probably a good idea because we know Neville's a little clumsy. Okay, so everybody's looking forward to flying lessons in a way, nervously, very nervously. Now, poor Neville. He has got his Remembral with him when he starts flying lessons. But disaster strikes almost immediately. Okay, Neville anticipates. Madam Hooch, remember, she said, okay, on my count, 1, 2, 3, kick off from the ground, come up in the air just a little bit, tip forward, and come back down. Neville's so scared that Madam Hooch said 1, 2, and Neville shot up like a rocket, and he couldn't get back down. Pretty scary. So, poor Neville, he finally falls off his broomstick, breaks his wrist, and loses his Remembral. Who found that Remembral? Do you remember who ended up with it? Somebody write in. Yeah, Malfoy, exactly. Draco Malfoy got the Remembral after Neville dropped it. And he was going to put that Remembral somewhere for Neville to find. Yeah, up a tree. Well, Harry was having none of that. He was going to defend his friend. He was going to get that Remembral for Neville, one way or another. And so Malfoy takes off, and Harry goes after him. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. Harry's first flight on a broomstick. And he's got talent, natural talent. And he loves it. Have you ever experienced something like this? something effortless, something you just naturally knew how to do. You didn't really have to be taught. Well, that's what Harry is feeling. And he is feeling a fierce joy. Those two words don't seem to go together very well, do they? When we think about something fierce, sometimes we think about something rather mean. But when we use it to describe joy, it means a very, very intense joy. Something that really encompasses all of Harry, all of his emotions, all of his thoughts. He's so joyful. He loves this flying. This is where he belongs. He's found something he can do wonderfully. And it intimidates Draco Malfoy to no end. Yeah, Draco's up there all by himself. No Crabbe, no Goyle to protect him. Nope, he's on his own. So he throws the Remembral up into the air, and Harry takes off after it. And he enters into this spectacular dive down to the ground. He catches the Remembral, and he just gently rolls off his broomstick onto the ground. And he is loving it every minute until he looks up to see Professor McGonagall. Now remember, Harry's not supposed to be on his broomstick here. Madam Hooch said, you guys leave those broomsticks on the ground. You've all heard teachers speak like that. You know when they mean business, right? And she meant business. But Harry didn't obey. And now he's getting caught by Professor McGonagall. And she says, come with me, Potter. Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle's triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strolled toward the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. We go from the high of his first flight to the low of thinking he's going to be expelled. Okay, he's part guilty. You knew he shouldn't have been on that broomstick, right? You know when your conscience tells you you've done something that you shouldn't. He's part fearful. He's thinking that, well, maybe if they expel me, they'll let me be an assistant to Hagrid. That's not much better. He can picture everybody else becoming a wizard or a witch, and he's stumping around carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor McGonagall goes into Professor Flitwick's classroom and asks if he can borrow wood for a moment. Now, Harry has no idea what this wood is. Remember what he thinks? Do you remember what he thinks wood is at first? Can I borrow wood for a moment? Anybody remember? Not a person. He thinks wood might be even a cane that Professor McGonagall is going to smack him with. So Harry is coming up with all these wild interpretations here. He sees McGonagall. He sees her sweeping along. She's not looking at him. She's mad, he thinks. And he's making these interpretations. I'm going to get expelled. She's going to hit me with something. Maybe I can stay and be with Hagrid. Okay, and then, much to his surprise, he finds out that all his interpretations are wrong. What happens? Let's see. Wood turns out to be a person, first of all. And McGonagall says, Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I've found you a seeker. Professor McGonagall wasn't angry at all. Well, at least that wasn't her primary emotion. I mean, she might have been rather miffed that Harry disobeyed, right? But she was excited. In fact, she was thrilled. Somebody asked in here, I wonder if JK Rowling wrote any other books beside the Harry Potter ones. Yes, she did. She has a mystery series for adults. and you can look those up. She writes them under another name, and I'll have to look that up and get that for you, but I'll tell you next time. But they are as a mystery series for adults too, as well as the Harry Potter books. Good question. Okay, so Professor McGonagall, she's excited. She's thrilled. She recognized Harry Potter's talent when she saw it. Oh, somebody else wrote in Robert Gilbreth. Thank you. That's correct. Okay, Harry's talented. Harry can play Quidditch. Harry can be a seeker. Harry doesn't know anything about what a seeker is yet. But he's relieved. He's relieved and he's bewildered. All of his interpretations, everything he thought was going to happen to him, right out the window. And Professor McGonagall has found a seeker for Gryffindor's Quidditch team. Things aren't always as they seem, especially in the wizarding world. Remember what Professor McGonagall tells him? You train hard now, Harry, or I might have to rethink punishing you. With a grin. She's not always so stern as she seems, is she? She also tells him that his father would be very proud of him because his dad was a Quidditch player too. And that makes Harry feel really good. So he's gone from the height of that first flight to the low of thinking he's going to be expelled and right back up to the high of being the youngest seeker in a century on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Pretty cool. Well, not the low part, but you can see the contrast, right? You can ride Harry's emotions almost like a roller coaster. Okay, but somebody else is pretty jealous here. Draco Malfoy had been really hoping that Harry would get expelled. He doesn't like Harry. He doesn't like Harry at all. Harry snubbed him on the train. Remember? Harry said, I know, I can tell who's the right sort for myself. Implying, of course, that Draco's not. And that turned Draco into an enemy from the get-go. And now, he is so jealous. And he challenges Harry to something. I'd take you on any time on my own, said Malfoy. Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only. No contact. What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose. Okay, so Malfoy's issued a challenge. And Harry can't resist. He accepts it. What do you think? Should Harry have done that? Should Harry have accepted Malfoy's challenge? Somebody's written in. No, big no, with lots of exclamation points. Yeah, I agree. Okay, Harry knew better than that. He knew better than to go sneaking around the castle at midnight. And he knew better, or he should know better, than to trust Malfoy with anything. Okay, well, why do you think he does it? Why do you think Harry says yes to this challenge? Why would somebody do that, even if they knew that that probably wasn't the very good thing to be doing? What do you think? Maybe he didn't want to look. Whoop, let's see. Somebody says, yeah, that's what I was going to say too. He didn't want to be seen as a coward. Harry's got his pride, doesn't he? He wants to look good in other people's eyes, even Malfoy. He doesn't want to be seen as a coward. And so he accepts the wizard challenge. And of course he has to ask Ron, what's a wizard duel anyway? And Ron says, don't worry about it too much. You guys don't know enough magic to be able to do much than shoot sparks at each other. Well, what happens if I can't do anything? Harry says. Ron says, throw your wand away and punch him in the nose. Might be good advice, but somebody else overhears what they're talking about. Hermione. And being Hermione, she speaks right up. Don't you care about Gryffindor? Do you only care about yourselves? I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup, and you'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. Now Hermione is right, isn't she? She knows that that's going to get those boys in trouble, especially if they get caught. Harry just missed getting in trouble. Only what, maybe an hour ago? Okay? And Hermione speaks right up. She even waits up for them. She even tries to stop them. She knows that this is a pretty foolish choice. But her persuasion isn't very effective, isn't it? They don't want to listen to Hermione. Okay, she's right. But what does she do? What kind of attitude does she take that prevents her message from getting across, that stops Ron and Harry from listening to her? What do you think? How does she is both right and yet so ineffective at the same time? Why does that happen? How does Hermione do something a little goofy here that keeps people from listening to her? What do you think? Do you know? Think about her attitude. Okay, don't you care about Gryffindor? I don't want to lose Slytherin to win the House Cup. You'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. She focuses a little bit too much on herself, doesn't she? Yeah, she started bragging. And we don't like to listen to her when she's bragging like that. Exactly. She turned it back on herself again. Okay, so she's right, but the way she presents herself, the attitude that she takes, stops Ron and Harry from listening to her. Okay, they just think she's interfering, she's bragging again, she's such a know-it-all, we're not going to listen to her. They don't stop to think, maybe Hermione's right. And of course, she is right. And Harry and Ron, they go out of the Gryffindor common room that night with Hermione chattering along beside them, still trying to convince them not to do this. Really, guys, this is a bad idea. And of course, remember what happens? Hermione goes right out the portrait hole with them, only to turn around and find the fat lady gone. And she can't get back in to the Gryffindor common room. And then they trip over Neville, sleeping in the hallway, because he couldn't remember the password again. So we got 4 people now, instead of just 2, wandering around the castle at night when they're supposed to be in bed. This is a bad situation. This is a setup for disaster, isn't it? And guess what happens? Disaster, or pretty near disaster. Malfoy had no intention of showing up for that wizard duel. He tipped off Filch. Filch is the one who shows up in that trophy room to meet Harry and Ron that night. Okay? And they have nothing else that they can do but run. And run like mad. Run, Harry yelled, and the 4 of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another, Harry in the lead, without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and came out near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. Yeah, they're in trouble now, aren't they? Look at the language that JK Rowling uses in this little passage. Remember how we've talked about her vivid descriptions and her good word choice? Okay, this is another example of this. Look at how many words for run and for move that she uses in here. Sprinted down the gallery. That's a really fast run, right? They swung around the doorpost. You can almost picture them grabbing onto the door and swinging around. They gallop down one corridor or another. We can picture that too, can't we? That's a specific kind of running. really fast. Okay, they ripped through a tapestry. They hurtled along a corridor. Look at all these vivid words that she uses to help us picture this. Yeah, ran like mad. They sure did, didn't they? Okay, so she doesn't just say they ran or they went very fast. She uses all these different words to show us in different ways exactly what they were looking like as they ran. Another good example of how JK Rowling is such a good writer. Lots and lots of different verbs that help us use or fill up our mental picture. And they're not out of the woods yet. They run into somebody else. Remember? Peeves. And Peeves is all too happy to call for Filch. So off they go again. Hermione opens the door with magic when they crash into it, right? They think they're at the end of the line. They crash into this door. Hermione says, "Get out of the way." And she uses one of her spells, Alohomora. And they pile through the door. And they're relieved for a moment. They think they're safe. They think finally they've gotten away from Filch. Now they just have to wait a little bit before they can get back up to the common room. And then Neville starts pulling on Harry's robes, doesn't he? The little problem here. Neville has seen something. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog which filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. Well, there isn't any difference between appearance and reality with this dog, is there? This is just a plain, scary monster dog. Now, when we first started camp, remember I told you that JK Rowling has her degree in classics? This dog here, this 3-headed dog, he comes right out of Greek mythology. Does anybody know where we see a 3-headed dog in Greek mythology? Can anybody tell me? You might not know this one. Nope, somebody does. Let's see. Yeah, very good. In Hades, in the underworld. So in the Greek underworld, Hades, there is a 3-headed dog named Cerberus. And this dog guards the underworld in Greek mythology. He's supposed to prevent anybody from getting out and also people from coming in who aren't supposed to be there. So we have a guardian 3-headed dog. Well, guess what? We have a guardian 3-headed dog at Hogwarts too. And in fact, we find out a little bit later that Hagrid bought him from some Greek chappie. All right, so Rowling here is being really clever. She is using Greek mythology and incorporating that into her story. So our job as readers is to try to catch those little things. There's a lot more in the Harry Potter stories that comes from Greek mythology too. And I bet some of you would know some of it if you think about it. Think about Fawkes the Phoenix. We won't talk about him in this book. Okay, but here's one of the examples of JK Rowling drawing on a tradition that she knows very, very well and making it her own. We've talked a lot about that already at camp here. Using a story, getting ourselves in the story, making the story ours. JK Rowling did that too. She made the story of Cerberus in the Greek underworld her own. And now she's using it in her own story as well. So we have a guardian dog, a 3-headed dog. And he's guarding something here too. Or at least Hermione notices something. Somebody loves Greek mythology. Good for you. So do I. Greek mythology is really interesting to read. There's lots of fun stories in there. Okay, only Hermione notices. Everybody else is too busy trying to get out the door and away from this dog and back to their common room. But Hermione notices something that the dog was standing on. Ron and Harry think, the floor? Nope, a trapdoor. The dog is standing on a trapdoor. He's guarding something. And that's where the chapter leaves off, with Hermione huffing off to bed, as if they'd asked her to go along, you know, and another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Something is at Hogwarts. Something that needs a monstrous three-headed dog to guard it. Interesting. As we continue to read, we'll find out more about the puzzle. So let's take a look at your journal question for Chapter 9. In Chapter 9, Harry goes back and forth through extreme highs and lows. Make a list and label them as high, exciting and positive, and low, troubling and negative. We did that a little bit when we were talking about Harry's first broomstick ride, what happened afterwards, etc. But expand on that, because this chapter does have the theme of high and low. Harry goes on a roller coaster of emotions throughout this chapter. So when you're working on your journal, see if you can pick those out. Okay, so we're getting toward the end of our camp period for today. I wanted to show you guys a couple of images. But I also want you to be able to ask some questions if you'd like. So go ahead and type in any questions that you might have, and I am going to get a couple of images to show you that I think are really fun. Okay, so hang on there. Like I said, if you want to type in image or questions, go ahead. This first one here, I hope you can see this okay. This is Professor Snape's classroom, the potions classroom. This comes from Pottermore. Like I said, we always have to kind of remember to make our own images as we're reading. That's part of reading, right? Reading does a movie in our head thing. But it is fun to look at illustrations too. Somebody's got a question for me. Why did Hagrid buy Fluffy? Ah, good question. Hagrid likes monsters, doesn't he? He thinks they're just such interesting creatures. He loves unique and, to the rest of us, scary creatures. I think he likes the challenge of seeing if he can tame them, seeing if he can get them to be friendly to him. So when he gets the chance at a three-headed dog, well, of course he's going to take it. My goodness, who wouldn't want one of those, right? Okay, so you can see the potions classroom here. You can see Professor Snape up there. These are all available at Pottermore if you'd like to go look at them in more detail. Here's Hagrid's hut. Look at his nice cabin with the rain barrel out here in the front. Did Hagrid get Fluffy as a puppy? I don't think so, probably. And the reason I say that is because he is this three-headed dog that we know of in Greek mythology. So I'm not even sure where Cerberus came from, but we always associate him with being an adult dog. So my guess would be he probably got him as a scary, big adult dog. Typical Hagrid, right? The scarier, the better. And there's Fang. You can see Fang here in the image. Fluffy makes Fang look pretty unremarkable. Here's from the movie. Neville, poor Neville, taking off on his broomstick. There's Madam Hooch. And finally, Fluffy, the three-headed dog. Leave it to Hagrid to call him Fluffy. We don't find that out in this chapter, but we do later on. All right, any other questions, comments? Okay, if you do think of something, whoop, there is one more. Hang on a minute, guys. Oh, why did Hagrid name Fluffy Fluffy? Well, again, Hagrid has this tendency to see big, scary monsters as cuddly little house pets. So he probably figured, you know, he's got a lot of fur. He might be kind of cuddly. If I can tame him down a bit, let's name him Fluffy. Probably didn't get much further than that. What would you have named him? Probably not fluffy, right? Okay, so if you have other questions, please make sure you email me at camp@signumu.org. And we will come back on Monday and pick up with presentation 6 in our Signum Academy Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone camp. So thank you, all you magical people, for joining me today and this week, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend.